In this video, we're going to talk about the difference between sketch dimensioning in Solidworks and Solid Edge. We're going to do Solid Edge first. So let's actually start by creating a line. When you create a line in Solid Edge, one of the options that you can see right here is that you've got the option to key in the dimension. So I could key in 3 right here and press enter, and then place the dimension. And this automatically adds a dimension, but that isn't the default behavior in Solid Edge. So if you just install it today and start running it, you'll get a different behavior. You won't get this dimension. To get that setting, you'll want to go to the IntelliSketch settings, go to the Auto Dimension tab, make sure that Automatically Create Dimensions for New Geometry is turned on, and then make sure that you've got Only When Geometry is Created with Keyed In Values turned on. Because if you use the When Geometry is Drawn option, you'll get kind of a mess on the screen, and every time you draw a line or an arc, you're going to get a dimension on it, and it's not necessarily going to be the one you're looking for. So you might as well just get it when you actually key in a dimension, and that's something that you're going to want. So that's one way to get a dimension very quickly and easily in Solid Edge. Now, Solid Edge does have a Smart Dimension tool just like Solidworks, but you'll notice that it also has a list of other types of dimensions that you can create. In Solidworks, some of these dimensions, like the coordinate dimension, are available through a right mouse button menu. But here they're right up on the toolbar. And if we kick off the Smart Dimension tool, you'll notice that a lot of these dimension types are available right from here. And this area is called the command bar, equivalent to what Solidworks calls the property manager. So if we were to click on this angled line, we could get an aligned dimension, and that might be what you want. But it's more likely that you want a horizontal or a vertical dimension. So this orientation switch is a great tool to be able to use. Let's also talk about this Use Dimension Axis option that's available. I'm going to draw a line in this sketch that's going to represent something in the model, but not necessarily relevant to what we're doing right now. This tool, the Dimension Axis, if I click on that, I can click on this line, and now Solid Edge knows that this is the dimension axis. If I start making dimensions, let's say from the end of this line to the center of this arc, I can tell Solid Edge to use the dimension axis, and now it's parallel to that line. So if you need to get dimensions aligned to something other than horizontal and vertical in a sketch, that's very easy to do using the dimension axis. Using the 2 points option is also very similar to a dimension axis. Notice also that this Smart Dimension, if I click on this end of the line, what it's automatically doing is giving me the length of that line. But if I click on something else, what it's doing is it's picking up the endpoints that are nearest to where I clicked. So there I picked the outermost points. I can go back and click the innermost points on these 2 lines. So there are a lot of ways to get your dimensions set up. Also, I could get an angle dimension using the Smart Dimension by just hitting the A key. And this will give me the angle off of horizontal or the angle off of vertical. You can also use the option here to get an angle between 2 lines. And in the Smart Dimension command bar, if I select this line, it gives me the option to change to an angle right here. So there's several ways to get access to these various dimensions. You notice as a dimension is being placed, it's orange. Once it's placed, it becomes red. Or there might be a time when you get a dimension that's actually blue. Red dimension is what's called a driving dimension. That's like a black dimension in Solidworks. The blue dimension is known as a driven dimension, and that's equivalent to a gray dimension in SolidWorks. So if I single click on the 52 degree dimension here, this gives me the option to change this to a 50 degree. If I single click on the driven dimension, the command bar comes up. If I click on it again, it allows me to change the value, but look what happens. If I change this to 1.6, the value changed, but the geometry didn't change. And notice that it has an underline here that tells me that this is not to scale. Now, the difference between selecting something twice and double-clicking on it may be kind of subtle, but we got to the point where we changed the dimension by clicking on it twice, not double-clicking, single-clicking on it twice. But if we do double-click on a driven dimension, we get the opportunity to drive it with a formula or to change the name of it. And also notice that you can change a dimension from driven to driving right in the command bar. Notice when I did that, it popped back to its real value, got rid of the underline, and now this dimension is connected to the geometry again, using the scroll wheel on the mouse to change this value. Notice also that there's this lock symbol. Lock symbol in Solid Edge doesn't mean the same thing it means in SolidWorks. In SolidWorks, it means you've got a locked dimension and you can't change it. In Solid Edge, it means that the dimension is locked to the geometry and that it's a driving dimension. A change in the dimension value is going to mean a change in the geometry. If I turn this off or unlock it, then what happens is it makes this a driven dimension again. So it's blue, and the command bar shows this as a driven dimension. So there's a lot of ways to get geometry to go back and forth between driven and driving dimensions. There are other types of dimensions in here that are going to be sort of self-explanatory. A coordinate dimension, just follow the prompt bar down at the bottom or wherever it's located on your computer. Can select here, we put a 0 on there and values. Now we can also take these dimensions and make them driving. So coordinate dimensions aren't stuck in one gear. There are some other things that you can do with the dimension command bar in Solid Edge. We could take this radius value, turn it into a diameter value. You can add a jog to it if you need to do that. The dimension type can have different tolerances. You can make this an inspection dimension, which adds a hot dog around it. And you can create a prefix or a suffix, a superfix or a subfix to add annotations or symbols to your sketch dimensions in Solid Edge. Pretty powerful tool all in all, and it's easy to get used to once you know where all the settings are. If we now switch over to SolidWorks and we want to do the same sort of thing, SolidWorks has a single sketch dimension tool, and you can do a lot with it. You can click on the same angled line here and get an aligned dimension, horizontal or vertical, without switching any options. You can also get an angled dimension, and this was pointed out by a viewer recently, by selecting on a plane, and now you've got an angle dimension, and you can get the inside or outside of that very easily. Also, one of the cool things about the SolidWorks dimension tool is that if you've picked a number of things, for example, I just picked this plane and I picked a line earlier, you can hit escape and it will dump whatever the last thing was that you selected. So the last thing I selected was the plane, and now I'm back to just having the line selected. If I press escape again, now I'm still in the tool, but I don't have anything selected, so I could pick something else, like this line down here and this line up here, and put that dimension in. Now notice that the SolidWorks, that came up as a black dimension. It's got the modify box, which I think this has to do with your screen resolution and the size of your icons and whatnot, but when this comes up for me, it just looks ridiculously large. It Remember that what came up in Solid Edge was very simple and easy to work with. Your scroll wheel still works here, or you can use the wheel down here. This is supposed to be a big scroll wheel. Or you can use the scroll arrows here as well. And that interval can be changed using this spin increment value. And so that'll affect both the wheel on your mouse, the wheel on the interface here, and the arrows. If you change this, set at 1 millimeter now, but it could be set to 5 millimeters, 10 millimeters, a half a millimeter, 50 thousandths of an inch, or whatever you want to do. And you can switch your default up as well. Angle dimension here can also be handled by selecting two angled entities, and you can get a number of different variations of that angle. If I were to select from here to here, Solidworks would dimension from that line. It doesn't pick up the end point, it picks up the line itself. So that's one of the major differences between Solid Edge and Solidworks, is that Solid Edge will go to the nearest endpoint and Solidworks will pick the entire line. So actually Solid Edge is much more flexible in that respect, because you could still get this dimension, but you could also get a horizontal dimension, you could get an aligned dimension. Over here in the property manager, we really don't have that many options for driving this dimension. Solidworks does have some options, though, as I mentioned earlier, on the right mouse button menu. One of the options here is to select more dimensions, and now you've got all of the types of dimensions that Solid Edge had in the toolbar. Also, if we were to select a radial dimension, right-click on it, and make it driven, add link values, have display options, so it would be displayed as a diameter, shown in parentheses, show as inspection with the hot dog. There's several different options that are available in Solidworks. They're just available in different places. So that's the difference and similarities between Solid Edge and Solidworks. I like to give it to Solid Edge for all of the variability it has in the command bar, but I also like the use of the escape key in Solidworks. So sketch dimensions to me are kind of a draw between the two programs. Thanks for watching.